Hello and welcome to First Contact, the world's first podcast where we openly discuss all things relating to humanity's preparation for open contact with extraterrestrial intelligence. I'm your host, Isha Patel. If you are loving this content, please be sure to join us in the First Contact Facebook community and let us know what you think. Let's dive into another exciting episode of First Contact. All right, welcome everyone. So today I have the wonderful Esbjorn-Hargens. Now, Sean's story is a little bit wild. He definitely crosses the worlds when it comes to the esoteric, the exo studies, and then he also has a foot in the business world, the academic realm. And so I'm very excited to have this conversation today. And Sean is also an experiencer, which is always fun. Now, in this interview series, you would have seen that we've had all sorts of guests from Harvard professors through to abductees, through to contactees, to spiritual people. So we've had quite a bit of a mix, and Sean's kind of somewhere in between that. So I'm very excited to have you here, Sean, today. Thank you for joining us.
Yeah, well, it's exciting to be here, and I really love the work you're doing. And yeah, I'm excited to see where we go today.
Very cool. Now, if we had more than an hour, I would literally just turn around to Sean and say, tell us everything you know. But we've got about an hour, and I want to make sure that we really make the most of that time. So I'm going to be asking the questions that would be most relevant to the people that are going to be watching this a little bit later on. Our audience is a combination of people that are interested in UFOs and also people that are interested in spirituality. So the conversation, I really want to take it in that sort of direction today, though, of course, I'm open to any and all tangents that we end up on. We've ended up in time travel tangents and all sorts of things in other episodes. So let's just see where it goes. The first thing I want to ask you about, and I think it's always great to start from this point, for those who've had personal experience, I know some, some people like, scientists would say that, well, that's just anecdotal and, doesn't really count. If we can't measure it, it doesn't exist, sort of thing, and I kind of have the opposite opinion, because to me, and this is where I won't go too far down this tangent, but I think that's where science kind of fails. If you have, 100,000 people saying they've had an experience with a ghost,
Exactly.
or 100,000 people saying they've had an experience with some sort of, extraterrestrial entity, then that to me is science. And so I'm actually very interested in your personal experience. So why don't we start there by you sharing one or two of your key experiences that you've had?
Yeah, I often joke that I'm a microdoser of the anomalous. And by that, I mean, I've had a lot of different weird experiences. They've often been kind of subtle or simple or small in a sense. I haven't had kind of some of the full-blown classic, encounters with non-human intelligences. But that said, I have had multiple types of encounters with non-human intelligences. And I think when I add it all up, I'm kind of amazed at how many different experiences I've had. And then it becomes hard to deny that I'm an experiencer, even though I often don't think of myself kind of in that frame. I've had some really powerful precognitive experiences that came true over the course of subsequent months that really kind of rocked my world. When I was in my mid 20s, I was traveling in India. I was traveling with a woman. I got some precognitive hits on some things that were going on for her that she wasn't aware of, and that she was then gonna kind of realize that she was actually the survivor of sexual abuse, but she wasn't aware of that yet. And so that was a really intense process, because we traveled together for a number of months, and I just had this experience and I didn't know what to make of it, so I didn't say anything. And then we ended up going different ways. I came back to the States, and then I was sitting there in my kitchen, and I had this experience of this dark energy coming into the room, coming into my body, and I kind of crumpled over in pain, and I began crying, and I had all this intense somatic and emotional pain coming through my system. And I immediately knew it was her, that she had realized what had happened, and that basically she wasn't able to process all the intensity of the memories, and that basically that pain, in a sense, had kind of come and found me because we had a strong connection. and I was, on some level helping to transmute and process that material. So it lasted for about 5 minutes, which is a very long time for that kind of experience. And then I emailed her, and this was the very early day of emails where everyone had like a Hotmail account,
Yeah.
um, and I emailed her and I said, hey, I hope you're doing well. Something really intense happened to me yesterday. I'm wondering if anything happened on your end because I'm just curious, right? So I didn't say anything about what had happened. And she wrote back within like 12 hours, because there it's like you'd have to go to like the little internet cafe in India, pay some money, get like, 10 minutes of internet time. And she wrote back and said, yeah, I just started to have a series of memories come back to me that I'm a survivor of sexual abuse. And then I, shared my experience of like, wow, like, yeah, I had a sense that maybe that had happened. And when we first started traveling together, I had these strong, precognitive, hits of this. So then, we compared notes. So that was one big moment that just kind of rocked my world. I've seen ghosts. I've had an experience of seeing a ghost. I had a really powerful experience of what I refer to and many people refer to as a download, that seemed to be have extraterrestrial qualities to it and celestial qualities. I have a sense that Metatron was involved in that.
I
And
just pause you there. So,
yeah.
could you go into detail with that experience a little bit? Like, where were you? What were you doing? How did you know you're not crazy? Can we break it down a little bit?
Yeah, I don't know I've ever been able to answer the question, am I crazy? Because often you feel crazy. Right? Um, I mean, that's part of the opportunity with these experiences is to, navigate them in such a way where you're having to develop your own internal discernment and your own, kind of guidance and really surrender, really call on, your higher self, your soul, your guides, and each of us kind of navigates that process in different ways. For me, with this particular experience, I had just kind of, I don't know, I was coming home on a plane from Brazil, and I I don't know if you're familiar with the Enneagram personality system,
Mhm.
but it's got 9 different personality types. It's kind of got a cool sacred geometric diagram, and I've worked with that system for a long time. Be prior to this point, and then in this experience, I basically had this whole set of information just kind of arrive in my awareness, and it might have occurred over a few days, but there was like being on the plane, there was like a particular kind of like, whoa, like it was kind of like I was on fire, like I was like super creative, all kinds of connections. Like I couldn't unpack it enough. It was like I was overwhelmed. I couldn't make sense of it. I was excited. I was confused. It was just kind of like boom, this whole thing kind of emerged in my space. And so I started writing it down, trying to like get it out of me, kind of figure it out. I started making triangles and putting numbers and plus minus equal signs in the corners. I started taping them together. If you've seen Close Encounters of the Third Kind, there's that moment where he's making the, Devil's Tower out of the mashed potatoes, right? It's like kind of this like intensity of, like having this thing in me, this information, and wanting to like somehow get it outside of me so I could see it. It was like giving birth. It's kind of this weird process, and so I was staying up late at night making these geometric models, trying to like sort through this, this information, and I could feel I was getting closer because there was like these intuitive hits, there were these aha moments, there were little confirmations along the way. This was a multi-month process, and then one night I finally kind of was able to put together these two geometric sets of designs, kind of was able to integrate them into a single form. And once I did that, I remember seeing it on the counter and just this quality of relief coming over me of going, that's it. And it's not like I had that image in my mind of what I was looking at, but it was almost like there was a part of my awareness that recognized that this was what I was working to try and get out of me. And then since then, I've continued to kind of unpack and develop kind of the theory and the understanding of like what is this thing, what does it mean, what's the importance of it, and I have a whole book that I'm working on related to it. So that was another whole crazy experience. I'll share one more, and then we can move into other areas. I had an experience of myself as a mantid being, and that I was on a ship, and I was the scientist on board, or one of the key, scientists who was a mantid being. And this was a really interesting experience because on the one hand, it felt like it was a past life, but it also felt like it was a future life, and it also felt like it was a parallel life. And part of what I took from that was, a lot of reports in the experiencer literature talk about mantids, being very long lived, thousands of years in some cases. So the meaning I made out of this experience in part was that I have some connection to this mantid being, and maybe it's a part of me or I'm a part of it, and there's been that connection for a long time, and across possible past lives, likely across possible future lives, and of course, past and future and present are all mixed together, depending on what dimension you're in. And so, that was a pretty disconcerting experience of like, what? Am I that? Am I not that? Is that just me making something up? Is that wishful thinking? And, at the end of the day, I don't know what that means, but I'm open to a number of possibilities. It's like it was a powerful experience. Other people have had similar kinds of experiences. I take it seriously, but I hold it lightly. And that's kind of one of my guiding mantras for, working in anomalous, realities and experiences is, take things seriously if there's some good data points to do so, but hold things lightly because it's such a mystery. There's so many possibilities that when I see people grab onto a particular interpretation, it's often usually a partial interpretation, right? Like I feel like we're just starting to come to terms with the magnitude of what's happening on this planet and in other dimensions. And so, it's best to kind of keep an open heart and mind because we're still gathering information. We're, still kind of trying to make sense of all of this. And, I see people who have strong opinions about this or that. And I think there's evidence to support those strong opinions, but I think sometimes that same evidence can support other opinions or other theories or other possibilities.
I think you've raised some very excellent points there, and your attitude of look, let's just explore this. Let's not get too caught up in one thing just yet. And I see this a lot actually in the starseed communities. It's like I spend a bit of time in the forums and things like that, and people will have like one experience, or they'll go to a psychic, and a psychic will say, "Oh, you're Pleiadian or you're Arcturian or something." And then they just get fixated in this identity that's them. And I'm like, well, hang on a second. I mean, my understanding of this is that you're all of them because we're multidimensional beings. And so the way that I've experienced it is that we have soul aspects in multiple coexisting, as you said, future, past, parallel lifetimes all at once, because they're not actually in the same time dimension. So when they're existing in other dimensional realities, I personally have connected with quite a handful of soul aspects of mine. One of them is a ninth dimensional angelic being. One of them is a fifth dimensional being who's on board a starship. One of them is a ninth dimensional being from Lyra. And, you can look at that and go, oh, so am I Lyran? Am I from Lemuria? It's like, well, hang on a second. Maybe we're not thinking about it in the right way. Because in multidimensionality, time is nonlinear, space is nonlinear. And so when you remove time and space, you have this spectrum of experience that's coexisting, past, present, future, and also what would you say it? Like the dimensions interact with each other. Like I've had experiences where something has happened in the ninth dimensional frequency that has had a direct linear translation through to something in the 3D that's the same but not, and so you look at that and go, okay, well, if something happens in that dimension, is it cause and effect? Did it happen there and then did it happen here? Did it happen here and then did it happen there? Did I manifest it? Did I create it? Was there cause and effect? Or did the two things simply happen in two dimensions at the same time? Because because they're interconnected. And so I think that attitude of let's just be curious really applies here, because I agree. I think we really are at the brink of just the very early stages of what this multidimensionality and consciousness actually means.
Man, I am so happy to hear you say all that because that so resonates. Um, I share that kind of orientation with my students in the programs that I'm teaching, and it really matches my own journey. When all of this, when my multidimensionality really kind of started to awaken for myself, I ended up reaching out to different psychics and seers, who do like star seed readings and kind of give insight. And I did that I met with four different people over like a 2 year period. So it's kind of like, like every 6 months I would feel a connection with someone. I read their book or I saw them give a talk and I was like, yeah, like I want to have a one-on-one session with them and kind of see what do they pick up on. And it was wonderful and confusing because each of them had a different set of star systems I was related to. And there were some overlapping ones. Like, okay, three of them agreed I had some Pleiadians, a couple people thought I was from there, and I was just like, what? And, initially in my kind of rational, logical mode, I was like, well, one of them's wrong or they're all wrong or, but then I started to realize, no, like each psychic has, and each has different capacities of perception,
Mm.
right? And so depending on what their kind of, their background is and what star systems they're connected to, they're going to be more likely to perceive or experience those resonances and frequencies in me. And so certain things might show up for this person that don't show up for another person. And that, like you're saying, that like it's probably all of it's true. I probably have various types of connections in all of those different places. Some of them might be, family, some might be friends, some might be other aspects of my own soul, right? Some might be places where I've incarnated into that dimension for, several lifetimes. And so there's just a strong, harmonic connection to that, and maybe all of that is happening simultaneously in some sense, right? And so to really open up to the mystery, the paradox, the multiplicity of it, I think is so important because we do try and put it in a box like, oh no, I'm from this star system, and it's like, no, it seems like a lot more is going on than just that. It's even more exciting than that.
Well, this is it. And I think it's a very human thing to seek identity. It comes down from a very fundamental human need to belong. And I think the concept of multidimensionality for the average person shatters the current reality
Yeah.
where we are based in a very set identity. I mean, when I talk about identity, it's like you're a mother or a daughter or like in whatever context you're in, you have an identity. And so suddenly when you say, well, actually, you have multiple identities coexisting, that causes a huge identity crisis. Because what do you do with that? Well, am I Arcturian? Am I Pleiadian? Am I even a mother? What am I in this reality? Is my daughter in this lifetime my grandmother in another dimension? Well, what does that make me? What role do I play? It's very
Yeah.
confusing for the human mind, and I find
Right.
this so fascinating. Yet at the same time, when you do wrap your head around this, and I'm sure people who are listening to this, they're just going through that phase of awakening themselves. And the one thing I would say is just keep an open mind, because if you're in the early stages of this, it's really important to not fixate yourself, because that's actually where a lot of psychics and channelers end up putting limitations on themselves. I know heaps of channelers who just channel one, maybe like one or two beings, and there's a lot of famous ones out there that are like this as well, where they
Right.
just channel one being. And I'm like, well, that's cool. That's great that you found this one connection. But then they kind of stop there. And I'm like, well, hang on. That's one aspect of soul that you've discovered, or that's one being that you found in the multiverse. But when
Right.
you can truly access multidimensionality, it's like picking up a phone, and what I find so interesting is a lot of channelers, when they're just starting out, they go and channel collective groups. Like they say, oh, I channel Pleiadians or I channel the Arcturian High Council. I'm like, great. That's like me saying I picked up the phone and called China. Okay, well, there's like
Right.
billions of people in China. Like,
Right.
I mean, like, who are you speaking with? You know what I mean?
Right.
And so when you get more and more refined in that frequency, then you get very specific beings, you get very specific coordinates or pockets of the universe that you're connecting in with, and different frequencies come through at different times. And so I mean, I think there's an evolution in the process, and yet it's also kind of sad to see when people just box themselves into this one thing, because I mean, great that you've got this one superpower, but it's so, so limiting at the same time, you know? And so I think it's important to have that open-mindedness. And I think this is where your field of research really comes in, and you've explored this well. Now, I'll be honest with you, I haven't read all of your stuff. You've got a lot of publications out there, but I would love to go into a little bit about, you know, consciousness in general, because I think that is one of the topics you talk about a lot. You started off with animals, then you went into like plant consciousnesses, then you went into human consciousnesses. And so if we were to speak about consciousness in general, I'd love to hear your perspective on consciousness, multidimensionality, because we're really getting into, you know, not answering, but I guess exploring this question of who or what we really are.
Yeah, so consciousness has often been an area of focus for me. You know, in college, I studied animal consciousness, and I was really interested, like, what can we say about, plants and animals? What does the research, support? And it's amazing what's happened in the last 20 years. I mean, it's just those fields have exploded. We're able to say so much more, and it's just fascinating how sophisticated and complex and emotional and cognitive, like now we know that spiders have personalities. There are introverted spiders and extroverted spiders. We know that fish dream, and we know that plants have memory and learn. Right? These are just a couple quick examples. So it's like we
I didn't know
realize,
that about spiders, so
yeah,
that's
it's
very
not.
fascinating to me. I'm like, really? Next time
I
I
know.
see a little spider in my kitchen, I'm like, oh, hey, I wonder if you're an
Yeah,
extroverted or an introverted spider. I
yeah,
wonder what you're
right.
thinking today.
Exactly. It's incredible. So I started there, and then in grad school, I really went into like human consciousness, human transformation, development. How do we integrate? How do we deal with trauma? And then from there, I, kind of went into like fairy realm consciousness, and interacting and working with elemental beings and devas and the fae. And the more I went into that, then I kept popping out into galactic experiences. And so this again, it was like so confusing because I thought I was going into the earth in a sense,
Mm.
but I kept popping out and having these kind of cosmic encounters and experiences. And then I was like, well, what's what? And then I read this book, Meet the Hybrids, where a number of the people in that book talk about their ability to see, interact, and communicate with both kind of the fairy beings and the extraterrestrial beings. And that
Mm.
was such a relief because whenever I was hanging out with people who work in the fairy tradition, they didn't want to talk about ETs. Whenever I was
Mm.
hanging out with my ET friends, they didn't want to talk about fairy beings, right? And it was very like, well, what do you mean? Like, it's a multi-dimensional reality. Like, there's all kinds of beings. Like, why are we like pitching camps around one particular sort of being? And the other thing is, some ETs look like fairies, some fairies look like ETs. Some fairies live on other planets, in a sense, could be considered ETs. Some ETs live on this planet and could be, it's like, so it's so like mixed up. It's like, where do we even draw those lines anymore? So I think my interest in consciousness is that I'm interested in like kind of like intimacy with reality. Like
Mm.
I love reality. I think Earth is amazing and totally screwed up and fascinating and just like a great and horrible place to be. I think that, like the experience of being a human, the experience of making contact with other beings is so rich and dynamic and fascinating. Like, and so consciousness is this mystery because it's super close to us. Like we are swimming in consciousness. And yet, like the study of consciousness, there's no agreement on a definition of consciousness, right? Like there's so many theories and schools and camps. Like it's kind of like we're just like this fish in water. It's like we can't even see it. We can't even talk about it. It's like we're living and swimming in it, and yet like it's one of the biggest mysteries on the planet. So I love this combination around consciousness that we're having a conscious experience moment to moment, and yet the mystery of consciousness is so complete, so thorough. And also when it comes to contact, contact in a sense is two qualities of consciousness coming into relationship with each other, right? And I do a lot of work with subtle energies and the energy bodies, and I'm very fascinated with how different energy bodies enable different types of contact with different types of beings, right? And allow access to different realms or different planes. And that the more we cultivate and work with our different bodies and cultivate and activate the different inner senses that are associated with those different bodies, all kinds of different forms of contact and communication are possible. So for me, consciousness is kind of ground floor of all of this, right? I even teach a course in the Ph.D. program that I run. Next year, I'm going to teach a course on UFOs and consciousness, because one of the qualities, there's four main qualities that I keep seeing when it comes to the UFO phenomena, but also just anomalous realities in general. One is lights. Lights seem to show up in all kinds of ways in these experiences. Energy, electromagnetic energy, subtle energy, different kinds of ways in which people experience energy either internally or externally. Intelligence, the phenomena seems intelligent in a lot of different ways. And then participatory. And participatory is there's something about the phenomenon and ourself that's co-constitutive, meaning we and the phenomenon are co-arising simultaneously. We're contributing to the phenomenon is contributing to us, and I refer to this as the mutual enactment dynamic, that there's a way in which we bring something to the party and they bring something to the party, and there's this dance, there's this collaboration, there's this unfolding. And this is like synchronicity is so fascinating, because something that's arising inside you is also simultaneously arising outside of you. And it really begs the question, is there actually a line between inside and outside, right? And the phenomenon consistently erases these lines between inside and outside, self and other, past and future, here and there, right? So the phenomena is always reminding us of this non-dual nature of reality, just this core source out of which everything unfolds moment to moment. And so the contemplative traditions that have really gone deep with consciousness and studied consciousness and developed practices for us to cultivate modes of perception, I think they have a lot to offer us in terms of contact. And so I'm interested in part, like, how do we bring the contemplative traditions and have them intersect with the UFO phenomenon and disclosure and contact, right? Because a lot of the religious traditions, Tibetan Buddhism and Hinduism, it's like they have so much they can offer this process, but they often like kind of stay clear of it. It's like, okay, that's a distraction. Just stay on the path to enlightenment. Don't get, sidetracked with, these psychic powers or these encounters with different beings. But I've talked with many lamas and rinpoches and meditators who have encounters with greys, who have encounters with manted beings. So I know that the multiverse is showing up even in those spaces, right? So I'm very interested in consciousness because I think, in a sense, it's the main game in town, right? And yet we know a lot about it, and at the same time, it remains such a complete mystery.
Yeah, I love that so much because, a lot of people do discover these, I guess they stumble upon these galactic frequencies and things through other forms of meditation. It could be, Kundalini, or it could be,
Right.
Buddhist meditation. I had crazy experiences on a Vipassana retreat I did
Right.
maybe like 12 years ago.
Yeah,
And it's funny
exactly.
because when you walk into a Vipassana retreat, they make you sign all these forms. They're like, well, I promise I won't do Reiki and I won't do this and I won't do that. I'm like, well, okay, cool. Well, I'm just going to sit on my ass and, do the Vipassana. And I
Right.
did. And next thing, I'm having a full light body activation. And I'm like, I remember thinking, I was like, I don't think I'm meant to be here.
Was
And
this
I
on the
just, I just
farm?
was.
Was it a Goenka retreat where you were watching the
Yeah.
videos of
Yes.
Goenka? Yeah,
Yeah. I
yeah.
did the 10-day silent retreat and it was quite profound. I think somewhere around day 5 or 6, I'd been sitting there all day, every day. You're doing meditation from 4 o'clock in the morning to 9 o'clock at night. And it's quite intensive. And yeah, there was one point where I had this experience where my body completely dissolved. Now I'd had this experience one time before, a couple of years prior, when I was activating my light body. So I work with the Merkaba light field a lot. And so as I was activating my Merkaba light body, I was visualizing the geometry, and I've been doing this practice consistently for about a year and a half at that point. And my body just completely dissolved and went into nothingness,
Wow.
And then when I was on this Vipassana retreat, I had the same experience again. And I knew, I was like, the first time it happened to me, I had this sort of inner knowing, or this voice that kind of said, you're in the 13th dimension, which at that point, I didn't know what dimensions were. I'm talking like
Right.
early 20s here, like, in uni, like, what's going on? This is crazy, And so I had that experience and this voice. And I remember back then jumping on Google and be like, what's the 13th dimension in the universe? And of course, nobody had figured it out. There were no
Right.
articles, not even spiritual articles. There was no one talking about it back then. And so that was the moment where I was like, oh, I think I need to explore this myself, because this, like, I've gone beyond what the spiritual teachers are talking about online. So anyway,
Yeah.
I have been exploring this for a decade, but when I went to the Vipassana, I had that experience again. And I think I went and actually talked to the I don't know what you call them, like the guru who's there, like the teacher.
Yeah.
And I went and spoke to the teacher about it. And I said, look, I had this experience. And he kind of just said to me, he was like, oh, look, yeah, that happens sometimes, like when you're just focusing on the body, you can have these experiences. And he kind of was just like, it's no biggie. And I'm like, okay. Seems to be like
This
normal,
is,
you know?
I know, and this is where sometimes I get kind of on my soapbox, because I find that the traditions and teachers, like in that situation, they don't know what to do with these experiences. And so
Yeah,
on
yeah, I have
on the
found that as
one hand,
well.
they might be ubiquitous, where yeah, a lot of people have that kind of experience, but they also kind of dismiss it. It's like, just go back to the breath,
Yeah,
just go
yeah,
back to the practice, right? Like, just, that's a distraction. And I understand in some contexts it is a distraction if you're trying to go a particular direction. But I'm really promoting that, because I keep having conversations with people such as yourself who have these multidimensional experiences. They have contact experiences in kind of traditional meditation retreat situations, and they're profound, they're important, something's trying to come through, and yet the tradition and the teachers involved kind of don't know what to do with it, and they just say, oh, it's nothing, ignore it. And I think that's a miss, right? I think there's something that, I want our teachers and the traditions to become more conversant with these phenomenon and the multidimensionality and these different beings, so that when their students have these experiences, they can say, yeah, that's not what we're doing here, but that's a really powerful experience that you really should explore when you finish the retreat. And you might have some more of that come up in this retreat, and that's fine if it does. Like, I don't know, something like a little more supportive, a little more guidance, a little more understanding that this is something more than just, some weird thing that's happened to your body because you're meditating. It's like, no, you're showing up in the 13th dimension, like something much bigger is happening, right? A whole new life path, in a sense, is kind of unfolding for you, and you're just tapping into that. And so yeah, I think there's a lot of ways in which our traditions, can, do some more homework and be more supportive of the multidimensional realities that their practitioners are discovering.
Yeah, 100% agree with that. I mean, I could go on many tangents in another day as well. I mean, I've had experiences. I used to have a studio here in Perth, and some of my facilitators who were teaching classes at my studio would have these types of experiences because they were doing the work. I
Yeah.
had this one teacher, she was teaching Kundalini yoga, and actually had a Kundalini awakening, went back to her teacher, and the teachers were like, we don't know what to do with you, and basically ostracized her from the community. And she was like, what are you
Exactly.
talking about? Because the experience of Kundalini for her was, all these different past lives coming up. There was a lot happening in that
Right.
space. And I thought, well, geez, like no one was able to support her. And, so then she came to me and was like, what do I do? And I was like, well, I'm no expert in Kundalini, but I can tell you, how to deal with the other stuff. Like,
Exactly.
like,
Yes.
so I think there is a space for that. And also, I think where the discussion needs to go as well is, are we then excluding elements of consciousness by being
Totally.
very
Yeah.
single-minded on an end goal,
Yes.
which also ironically goes against what I know about most spiritual teachings, because like if you go back to Eckhart Tolle, like classic presence teachings,
Right.
well, he would say, well, if if your present moment is a galactic connection, then just be present in that. Like, don't try and get out of it. Don't try and, the whole process of trying to attain a goal goes against the very fundamental nature of enlightenment, in my opinion. And so for me, when I was coming across these experiences, I think that was when I really started taking with a grain of salt some of these traditional practices, because when they would say things to me just like, oh, just go back and sit in your practice, I was like, well, actually there's something in this. And if I'm having, a multidimensional experience, and if everything is source, then isn't there room for some expansion in that? And like, and embracing the everythingness, instead of just going, oh, I'm trying to achieve enlightenment, or I'm trying to achieve, this bodhisattva state, or whatever it might be, because it seems to be counterintuitive or counterproductive. Because what if the path to get there is by embracing everything? What if we go through the awareness of dimensional realities as the pathway to then experience the everythingness? And I know that when I was sitting in that, that frequency that was told to me as a 13th dimension, I felt one with everything. It didn't matter to me if something was galactic or fairy. And I've had a lot of elemental connections myself, tree beings, all sorts, unicorns, So in that moment, it didn't matter to me what that frequency was, because that was love frequency and that was source consciousness. And so in every other dimensional reality, those things, from what I've experienced, they take form. But when you get to the root of that source, everything just is. And so I understand why the teachings are like, no, just stay on track, just stay on track. But at the same time, I think there's room to go, well, hang on a second. If I'm on this train to enlightenment and I look out the window and I see a UFO, well, isn't that part of the destination at the same time? You know what I mean?
Totally. Yeah, we are soul sisters, brothers. So here,
I love
um,
it.
I often talk about total realization. And
Yeah.
total realization is both waking up and opening up.
Mm.
Waking up is the traditional path of freedom, or the path of emptiness, where you see through the illusory nature of all phenomenon, right? And so that's waking up, right? And kind of the classical Asian kind of traditions. Opening up is opening up to the fullness and the luminosity of all phenomenon, right? And so opening up is opening up to the UFOs, opening up to the fairy beings, opening up to whatever might arise in your experience, and not seeing it. You might penetrate the emptiness of it and see it simultaneously and paradoxically as, kind of non-substantial, but at the same time see it as substantial. It's like it's actually a physical craft, or it's actually an energetic being that has its own autonomous realities and experiences. So how do we combine the waking up with opening up, the freedom with the fullness, the emptiness with the luminosity? And it's ironic because the traditions often talk of like this, but they don't actually practice it in this context, right? Like there's certain experiences that they kind of exclude out. And so I'm so much about, like, how do we combine kind of the Western esoteric traditions that embrace our multiple bodies, embrace our psychic capacities, embrace our abilities to interact with a variety of non-human intelligences or alternate human intelligences. How do we do that alongside the, Asian traditions that give these powerful paths and maps of cultivating pure experience, awareness without time and space, awareness that is not, bound by subject object dynamics, right? And so, like, how do we bring those together? Because you're so right. Like, and this was what was so interesting when I was reading all of these authors in kind of the ufological context. Many of them were talking about source and oneness in ways that was very resonant with what my Tibetan Lama was talking about. And I was like, wait, what is going on here? How can they be saying something that sounds so similar to these other traditions, but these other traditions say this doesn't matter? And so I think we have to make room for all of this and embrace it, and help integrate it in a way that's coherent.
Absolutely. And I think it goes into that deeper exploration, really, of who we are as human beings, or who we are as multidimensional beings, and then going, okay, cool. How do we expand into that?
Yeah.
and this, this particular interview series that we're doing is very much focused around the UFOs. And so we've had, the ex-military personnel who have physically seen these
Wow.
phenomena, and they don't know how to explain it. And then you've got the psychics coming in going, well, I know exactly what that is. You just have to feel the frequency. And then, then you've got the Harvard professors who are like, well, actually, if we can't measure it, I'm going to build a giant telescope so that I can see it, and then I'll tell you if it's real or not. So we've had quite a wide spectrum on here. And what I find so interesting is that everyone's really trying to get to the truth in the same. It's like going to the same destination, but everybody's taking a different path. One person's getting on a boat, the other person's getting on a
Right.
train, the other person's decided to go by plane. And it's like none of them are seeing each other at the moment, like the scientific
Absolutely.
community is dismissive of the psychic community. The psychics are like, well, science is, in the Stone Ages, like we don't want anything to do with them. And then the UFO, activists are just like, well, the government's lying to us, and they're kind of relying on the government to expose the truth. And I'm sitting here somewhere in between going, well, hang on a second, maybe let's take a little bit from all of them. Like, yes,
Yeah.
we know that military personnel have seen UFOs for a long time. We know that the spiritual, traditions have been teaching similar concepts for a long time about energies and frequencies. So maybe we can take a piece of that, and then maybe we bring that together with, for like consciousness studies and some of the work that you've been
Right.
doing. Go, okay, well, cool. Well, there's a space for that in there. And then maybe, and this sounds crazy, maybe if we just all sat down and like tried to find the truth in our own meditation, maybe that would give us all the answers. So,
Oh my.
I
Yeah.
feel like somewhere in there you can merge all of those
Yeah.
worlds together and go, there's a room for science. Obviously, I come from a very scientific background. I come from engineering. I've studied chemistry, physics, all the things. And so I get that measurable element of this. But then there's also so many stories of people that you can't discount that. There might not be evidence. And yes, there's a lot of bogus out there as well, I will tell you. I mean, some of these stories, I'm like, that's a piece of rubbish. Like there's nothing in that. But then there's some real genuine gems, and I think that's where there's room for conversation as well. I'm curious to know, have you ever physically seen a UFO or had an experience where the multidimensional realm and the 3D realm have actually merged together with some form of physical or tangible experience?
I have not in the kind of classical sense you're asking. I'm maybe the closest thing is different synchronistic events where, there's a kind of obvious physical aspect to it, and but the timing and the way it's showing up is like so weird, and it's kind of like where there's like this blending of outside and inside, and external, and but yeah, I've not had a sighting of a physical craft, or the beings I've encountered have not, come across as physical beings in the classic sense. Though sometimes there's a felt sense that they're physical in their dimension, but I'm not like having a physical experience of them other than energetically in my own body. And I think going back to what you're sharing about the people that you're interviewing in this series and how they all have these different viewpoints, I write about this in the article Our Wild Cosmos, and there's a section of that where I basically talk about kind of the 10 major hypotheses that are out there. And since writing that, I've actually identified, a number of additional ones. But there's those who say it's extraterrestrial, right? UFOs are extraterrestrial. They're, flesh and blood beings from other planets. There's those who say it's interdimensional. There's those who say it's, crypto-terrestrials, right? That they've been living here longer than we've been living here. There's those who say they're time travelers. There's those who say it's all kind of, covert military activity that are doing the abductions. There's those who say, no, it's just, we're all in a simulation, right? Or no, it's a breakaway civilization. What we're seeing is actually craft from, the German breakaway group from, World War II. My sense is that the phenomena is so dynamic that all of those are likely true. And
Mm.
so the challenge is when you have a sighting, which one is it? was your sighting extraterrestrial or interdimensional or crypto, terrestrial or ultra terrestrial, or was it a breakaway civilization craft, or was it a simulation experience? It's like, so how do we discern that, right? Because it seems like each of these theories is explaining part of the phenomenon, and everyone like really builds their little castle around their particular view of it and try and say most, if not all, the phenomenon is this. And I'm like, you got to be kidding me! Like the phenomenon is all of this. It's showing up in all these ways. But it's like it's too much to embrace the multiplicity of the multidimensionality that we try and kind of like go, well, it's this or it's this and this, and like we might make room for two or three possibilities. But the fact is, it seems like there's 15 really good theories as to who these beings are and why they're here and what they're doing. And so we're just not at the point, I don't think, to like make super strong claims, in a globalizing sense, of like trying to explain the phenomena. I think we have to be curious, open-minded, and I think we have a lot to learn about multidimensionality, right? It's like we're still stuck in this kind of Cartesian, rational, concrete, physical, material framework, which makes sense. I mean, we've been stuck in these 3D bodies, and it's like we're trying to make sense of it. But I think we're moving into, and we're talking about the identities, the galactic identities, right? I think of that as galactic fluidity, right? We're seeing gender fluidity, across the world. Like there's also galactic fluidity, right? Of embracing your multiple galactic selves, past, present, and future. So I think we're just at the beginning. I'm so resonant with your view that all of these perspectives have a piece of the puzzle. And so how do we come together in conversation, dialogue, learn from each other, and remain open to the ways in which different viewpoints might actually have some piece of the mystery that they can help us understand better?
Right. I think you've nailed it so beautifully. I mean, yeah, I think there's truth in a lot of the theories out there, but I think there's also a lot of untruth in a lot of the theories out there. And
Yeah.
um I guess as we wrap up today, one of the things I want to come back to, and I say this a lot, I was working in the spiritual mentoring space for the last 8 to 9
Mm.
years. And my journey much, much longer than that. And one of the things I harp on about is discernment, discernment, and the way that I've been taught how to do it is in through like accessing through the heart portal.
Yeah.
People talk about, like the seat of the soul. You go into your multidimensional heart and then you access that soul frequency. And when you're operating from that space, you do have a greater capacity to have a greater inkling of what's actually connecting with you. So, if I see a ship in the sky, and I've had many physical sightings myself, if I see a ship in the sky, it's being able to know, well, is it an Arcturian frequency? Is it a Pleiadian frequency? Is it a military ship? And I've come across all variety of
Right.
things. And so again, it's coming back to, well, let's not just blanket label every single UFO or UAP in the sky is the same thing, because one of
Yeah.
them could be extraterrestrial, one of them could be interdimensional, one of them could be
Exactly.
secret military something,
Yeah.
one of them could be a spy thing from another country, who knows.
Right.
I think open-mindedness is definitely what's going to serve all of us. And I think that lends actually to the multidimensional theory that if we live in a multidimensional universe and if consciousness is so vast, then why are we trying to pigeonhole everything so early on? Let's just keep the options open for the moment. Let's, take everything with a grain of salt, but also let's not close any doors. And I think when we take that perspective, that to me is where the real science is. Science is in asking questions. Science is in exploration. It's not necessarily always what's physically measurable and observable, because in the field of consciousness, well, there's a lot more out there. So
Yeah.
yeah, I think
Yeah.
you've really opened a beautiful discussion for us all
Mhm.
today. Thank you so much for joining us, Sean. Do you have any
Oh,
final words for our listeners?
well, I think what's coming up is just this sense of consciousness, and how consciousness, even though we have this localized experience of ourself as a conscious embodied being, consciousness is part of the total field of awareness that goes way beyond our own individualized experience of ourselves. And it's like through consciousness, we have direct access to the entire multiverse. We have direct access to all these frequencies and dimensions. And so I think that's what's so fascinating about consciousness. And like, So by learning to work with our awareness, by working with different practices and traditions that train us and help us cultivate that discernment, like consciousness is just this fascinating field of awareness that can be highly differentiated and highly discerning if we put in the time and energy to work with our awareness and to allow it to grow and mature and to keep having feedback loops that support this discrimination and discernment. And so, yeah, it's been a wonderful conversation. I'm really excited about, everything you're sharing and saying. And it's not actually very common that I encounter someone where there's such a kind of what I would call an integral orientation to kind of the truth and falsity of all the perspectives and how we have to dance with them and just kind of remain open and curious. So it's really refreshing to connect and really excited to be part of the series. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Sean. And for those who want to connect with your work further, where is the best place where they may find you?
Yeah, so there's two main places. One is you can go to exostudies.org, and there's resources and materials there. I'm starting a 6-month community of practice program. I've been doing these for a number of years. It starts April 3rd, and we're going to be diving into kind of the foundations of exostudies. There's 15 core concepts, and if you go to the website and click on the course, those concepts are listed. Many of them we've been talking about today in terms of kind of the mutual enactment dynamic, and many of the concepts we've touched on. You can see me describing how I relate to those, and so we are going to dive into those concepts, and it's a combination of kind of intellectually exploring and connecting with the phenomena, but also it's very heart-based. And there's 60 people, 65 actually already in the course, and it's there's a wide range of experiencers. There's also people who have not had any kind of anomalous experience, and we really just make space for people to share their experiences and for us to do sense making together using these concepts and frameworks that I've been developing over the last few years. So that's one avenue. Another avenue that's more academic is, I run arguably the only, UFO Ph.D. program on the planet. It's based in San Diego. It's accredited. There's a master's degree and a Ph.D. And there's a concentration in anomalous studies. And so people can use that to study UFOs. We have a number of experiencers in the program that are doing, Ph.D. level research into the phenomenon, into experiencers. And I'm really developing this program to contribute to, a holistic academic understanding of the phenomenon. And so it's a very exciting space to be. So if you've always kind of wanted to get a master's or a PhD, but you just never knew where to go and you're really into these topics, this is a great place to do it. It's online, so you can do it from anywhere. And that's at the California Institute for Human Science, CIHS.edu. And you can email me, you can find me on the web at those two places, and just reach out to me. I'm happy to connect and also point people in the right direction of other things that might support them in their journey.
That sounds incredible. I think I'll be the first one to sign up for a PhD in UFOs.
Yeah, awesome. Yes, come join us.
I love that. Well, thank you so much for your time, Sean. It's been an absolute pleasure. Hey everyone, thanks for listening to First Contact. I'm your host Ish Patel, and I'm so excited to have this conversation about open contact with extraterrestrial beings. Come join me in the Facebook community where you can continue the discussion or keep listening for another episode of First Contact.